Time 7 o'clock meeting start. 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Thank you, Sean. Sorry for the lighting, guys, but it's just the way it is here in Phoenix right now. Before I forget, we got a shout out to Aaron in Yakima, Washington. He missed dinner, but he assures us he's watching. And everyone else is watching us around the country. Thanks for tuning in. We open every session of Position of Neutrality with a prayer. Wayne's here tonight to do that for us.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time that we could spend together. Thank you for your presence, Lord. Show us our brokenness and our need for you tonight, Lord. Let us go forward, Lord God, and just proclaim your name and your word to the world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Wayne. But that was a real lack of enthusiasm. It must be a first step night. What's going on? We're talking about powerlessness and unmanageability, and so we're going to have Wayne demonstrate it for a minute. He's better than that, guys, just so you know. So tonight we're back in step one. Those of you, if you've never seen what we do, if you're tying into us from a treatment center somewhere or wherever you might be, what we do, we've been doing for lots of years, we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book, and we use this book in 12-step recovery. Why? Yeah, the process described by the author of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. And in fact, it's been found, this manner of living has been found to help straighten out a lot of behavioral disorders of other types. So basically, if you're a human and you got problems, this manner of living can solve those problems, right? At least the power we access through the manner of living can. So tonight we're in step one, so I'll apologize in advance. Never have I taken anyone through a step one that we didn't experience some highs and some lows, because the experience of powerlessness and unmanageability is not always a happy experience. In fact, it seldom is a happy experience, yes? And we want to call your attention to that sensory experience, the futility of seemingly being powerless to change a deplorable situation. Most of us, by the time we get to recovery rooms, have had the experience of finding ourselves in a deplorable state with all the will in the world to want to get out and seemingly no power behind that will. Simply cannot get out, yeah? So some foundational stuff, because it's a first step night. I want to show any of you that aren't paying attention, if you'll open your book to the very first, the title page. We call it the big book. People always want to call it the basic text or the big book. But the title of the book is Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. And the reason I want you to know that is because what I'm going to try and do is show you how I find my experience in the book, not alter their testimony, because this is their testimony of how they recovered, the first 100 and the first several thousand they worked with. So anytime we alter it after that, we're watering it down. And so the job is not to water down what they said, but to find myself in the sensory experience of an awakened spirit within me that they describe. Does it make sense? Yeah. And then we go to the forward to the first edition, take some of the mystery out of maybe your first day or days in recovery rooms. They tell us who the we is. They tell you a little bit about the authors, and then they tell you a little bit about why you may want to read their book, and then we'll go from there. If that makes sense. So it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So why would I call your attention to that? How many of you have been in the rooms and had people tell you, we're a we program? We may well be a we program, but we're not the we in this book, and we're not the we on that wall. And if you don't know that and you're not having the same experience they describe, it probably means you're not doing what they did. And it's probably, if you really want to get well, you're not doing what they did because no one's told you what that is or how to find it. But it's in here. Does it make sense? It's not going to be in the modern rooms. It's in here. Somebody try and get in the door. So then what they also go on to say, to show other alcoholics precisely how we recovered is the main purpose of the book. The idea is it's not about telling anybody anything. We're supposed to show them how these principles have worked with us, right? So we don't have any earnestness. We don't have any comments about their behavior, right? Their faults are not discussed. We stick to our own. That's impossible if you're not in an awakened spiritual state, because you will have an opinion the way we present. Yes? So then I want to jump from there to one other thing I like to show people in case people don't know. On page XVII, Roman numeral 17, forward to the second edition, we focus everybody on the book as the program, and whatever happens in the rooms and church basements and what have you as the fellowship. And we want people to know that, because over the years, people have started referring to going to meetings as being in the program. And that's all well and good, except if somebody who desperately needs the program is sitting in the fellowship thinking they are in the program and they're not. Does that make sense? So in an effort not to confuse, yes? So it says, it's now time, the bottom of the page, it's now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. So what was the unique experience of the first 100? They had recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, against all medical opinions to the contrary, that was possible. Yes? In big numbers. They had seen them throughout the ages. Remember, the doctor said, I've seen a few here and there recover, but it's a drastic rearrangement. Yes? Right? That's what he talks about. Anyway. So it says, this determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. So in a very real way, AA, the fellowship, was named after the book, not the other way around. And you got to understand that. So you're not in AA unless you're in these pages. Does that make sense? And it's not a matter of altering what their testimony is. It's about figuring out how to find our way in it, which is why some one of us needs to show people what they found by illustrating it with ourselves. Does it make sense? Until someone calls our attention to this sensory experience that we in recovery call God, many of us never understood the experience that we're talking about. Yes? We're not talking about some theology or some bad experience or some non-experience. We're talking about sensory power of something stirring within me, a power to live. And I have been able to exhibit nothing but a power to die. Yes? Okay, so I'm going to jump from there to the doctor's opinion. And tonight I think I'm going to start at the bottom of XXVII. And the doctor's opinion, we're in the expanding text. The doctor was Dr. William Silkworth. Sometimes I look at his first letter and then the author's opinion of the doctor's opinion. But tonight I'm going to do some other things. So we're just going to get in the expanded doctor's opinion, right? So it's, of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor. So the earth-shattering news that Silkworth shared with Bill, that as an alcoholic, we're not only mentally and emotionally somehow different, we're physically different. We have an abnormal reaction when we put that substance in our body. Now, we hear jokes in our fellowship, you know, I'm allergic. I have a drink and I break out in handcuffs. And that would all be hilarious if it wasn't confusing people. Right? But what they're trying to say is this guy's a medical guy, and he's witnessing this abnormal reaction that alcohol seems to have on these alcoholic patients, and he realizes that these alcoholic types are stimulated by the sedative alcohol. How many of you folks have discovered when you drink alcohol, it energizes you? That's an abnormal reaction to a sedative. How many of you have had a similar experience with opiate drugs? That's an abnormal reaction to a powerful sedative, yes? Like you get hooked up and now you're out vacuuming the lawn and stuff. Yeah. So that's the physical component of the craving. It's going to be beyond my mental control because it lifts me up instead of chilling me out. Yeah. And that's why we think we're drinking like everyone else and they're going, oh, no more for me. I'm getting tipsy. We're like, that's kind of the point, isn't it? Anyway, never described it as tipsy in my life. Anyway. So it says, we believe and so suggested a few years ago that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. Kelly's here. That the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So ask yourself, what class are they talking about? They've discussed the chronic alcoholic. Yes? Okay, so these allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Have you had this abnormal reaction and wondered why you seem to overshoot the mark when drinking or using whatever it is you use? Like, did you ever consciously set out to not use as much as you ended up using?
One time.
And it lasted for how many decades? So they talk about how it kind of breaks us down. We can never safely use it in any form at all. So many of us go from one thing to the next and find ourselves back in the same trap. Yes? And they say that once having formed the habit and found we cannot break it, I had the habit for a long time before I believed I could not break it. Anyone like me? So that discovery is further down the line. Yeah? And then it says that once having lost their self-confidence, did you start to worry, even if you didn't speak it to others, about what was going on with you? Where's my cocaine addicts here? You knew the first time you put that shit in your body, this is all bad, right? I've never met anyone did cocaine and think, oh, this is all bad. There's a bad outcome coming. How about, yeah? What are you laughing about, meth, man? We're going to get to you. So I've lost my self-confidence and my reliance upon things human. How many of you depended on others to keep you accountable? Maybe placed yourself in treatment. Maybe the state placed you in treatment. Yeah, Wayne. If you're explaining to the captain, if he just let you do your drugs, you wouldn't cause trouble, you're probably a drug addict. Okay, so and then it says their problems pile up and then become astonishingly difficult to solve. Did you find that to be true? Yes. Did you find that you were progressively worse scrapes? Yeah. That's how problems pile up on us, right? All right. Then he talks a little bit about how to appeal. Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. How many people begged you, if you love me, you'd quit? You know you're dying. You got to stop this. You know you're going to go to prison if you don't knock it off, right? And yeah, all of that is true, right? So it says the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. Guys, scared straight doesn't work. You got to be able to speak to my condition. I'm in addiction. I'm walking in a living death. I'm a dead man walking around in an empty shell. And I don't think everyone knows it. I think I'm the only one that knows it. So when somebody speaks to me that knows that about me, they've got my attention. Some of you are, I'm feeling you feel me as I'm talking about it. So we are uniquely qualified because we've walked around dead a while. Yes? And we know how to speak life. And that has depth and weight. All right, so in nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. So now that's where everybody gets a little freaky because They're like, oh, I know what they're talking about. No, you don't. No, you don't, because they're talking to you about their experience, and he's talking to you about his witness of their experience. Yes? Because immediately we go to a bad church experience. Oh, they're talking about God. You're going to be religious, right? But where do we find the power? We're going to find it inside ourselves, not out there, and we're going to find that we're empowered to do things we once could not do. Yes? Okay. And so that's why he says that as a medical man. He's seen the return to life. He's witnessed it. So I want to jump from there to the bottom of the page. It says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. So are there drinkers here? Can you sit here sober and bring to consciousness, bring to your awareness that ease and comfort that comes from taking a few drinks?
Yes!
So it says the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it injurious, they cannot after a time differentiate the true from the false. Did you re-describe or redefine your reality in terms of your current circumstance several times? Yeah, right? If I ever do that, just shoot me. Right? And then all of a sudden, yeah. So to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. How many of you took it out of ways? Homelessness, incarceration, find yourself completely disenfranchised from everything human. And it's like it happened in an instant. Okay. So then it tells you something we need to know. Let's listen to the doctor. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. The doctor's opinion then, and it remains the same point now, no one asked you to live in permanent abstinence. They said if we do not replace that sense of ease and comfort within you, you will be restless, irritable, and discontent until you go find some ease and comfort wherever you find it. Yeah. And the likelihood is you'll go back to the dope man or the whatever it is you do. Right? That's his opinion. It's never changed. It also aligns with my experience. Okay. So then it says, after they've succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops. So craving doesn't develop until I've taken that first drink. And then that phenomenon of craving makes it impossible for me not to take the second drink. Right? So whatever power I find is going to have to be powerful enough sensory effect on me to take the second hit, just like cocaine was, just like heroin was, just like alcohol was. I never had to be persuaded to take the second hit. Anyone? Okay, so it says they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. How many of you have had that experience? How many of you had it more than once? So the doctor said that this is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. So you might want to ask yourself, what is an entire psychic change? Well, if you start looking for definitions, you will find that it's a spirit-led life instead of a mind-body-led life. There's other books, you might be familiar with some, that suggest the same manner of living, right? So why are we going to awaken in the spirit and then strengthen the spirit? We're going to walk in power. I'm going to walk in ease and comfort so I don't have to go out in the world looking for my ease and comfort. Yes? Makes sense? And again, this isn't a Bible. This is a doctor's opinion in a book about drunks. Interesting. So, okay, so I want to jump from there. I think I want to look at maybe let's just go through Bill's story tonight. I get into all that some other night. I'll start on page 5 then in Bill's story and see if we can relate to him. If you're a drinker, you'll probably relate right away. If you really weren't a drinker, but other things were your thing, you'll have to substitute it in as appropriate, right? So Bill starts out, he says, liquor ceased to be a luxury, it became a necessity. How many of you kind of recall when you were doing stuff for fun and games and it ceased to be fun and games? Was it a gradual crossing over for you? Or was it sudden? So he describes it. He says bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, often 3 got to be routine. So I don't know if you guys ever drank gin, but if you bank in 3 bottles a day, use hammered. You probably got dirty shorts, would be my guess. And he's saying that got to be the routine. And remember, if you look at the first part of his story, he's on Wall Street. He's an analyst. He's drinking with Pinky out. Yeah. So now he says, sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I'd pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to waken very early in the morning, shaking violently. So I don't know if you guys were drinkers, but did any of you get on the hook with somebody? And then you couldn't go see them to get more because you're on the hook with them, so you got to see somebody else. And then when it's time to go pay people back so you can get some more. Yeah, so that's where he's at, from the guy that had, spending in 20s and chattering in thousands, right? So it says a tumbler full of gin followed by a half dozen bottles of beer would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Any of you have to slug something down just to get normalized? If you drank gin like Bill did, like Joe did, you had to pour a bunch of gin down so you could just quit throwing it up, right, so that you could stabilize. And since you can't buy it till you get stable, if you're running low and you're drinking and throwing it up at a high rate, then you throw it up in a cup and drink it again. Yep. And I'm not proud of that. I'm just telling you that's what it looks like for me. Until I get well enough to go somewhere and wash myself and present, right? All right, so nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. Now that's the amazing thing. I've been drinking all night. I'm waking up in DTs. I'm throwing up. I got to throw this stuff down my neck, puke, and drink it again just so I can go buy more of that poison. And I got this shit. Any of you relate? Yeah. Any of you have an important court date to make or something? But, first, let me just stop here and get a little bump of something. Okay, so I still thought I could control the situation. There were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So they're talking about these little bouts where things would stabilize for a minute and maybe we'd get a little more support or sympathy or whatever we were looking for. Then he says, gradually things got worse. And I thought that's a weird tense change. Right. I mean, this cat was spending in hundreds and chattering in millions and sipping martinis at the club. Now he's begging at the bars and the delicatessens, probably walking around with dirty pants, because that's what we do. And he seemingly can't get out of this spin downwardly. And he describes that as gradually things got worse. Where's my people Joel's here tonight? How gradual was it for you, Joel? I won't throw you under the bus. My buddy TJ, I don't know if he's listening tonight. He's in the Dallas area. Professional musician, really skilled musician, does a lot of good for people. But when he was running and gunning, I went and picked him up one day in the slope because he said, man, I'm done. And I went and picked him up. He still had a cell phone. I said, TJ, man, you're done? You didn't sell your cell phone? He goes, you mean I can sell my cell phone? I said, yeah, man, the dope man will take your cell phone. He bailed out of that car. I didn't see him for another week. Now, this cat's a serious guy. He's a serious guy to this day. He's a serious recovery guy. But that's the miracle he's been pulled from, because that's really who he was. It was a freaking magnet for him. Anyway, so gradually things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at a low point of 1932, and I'd somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. How many of you went out and hustled up a deal while you're in the middle of your addiction? Like active running and gunning, but you put together a deal. How many of you pissed away the deal? He said, then I went on a prodigious bender and that chance vanished. Any of you relate to Bill? That's an experience of powerlessness, right? This guy was getting thousands and thousands of dollars for his consultations. So when he put a hustle together, there was some thought in it. Matter of fact, this book's probably his best hustle. He said it is his theory that it's more logical to believe than not to believe based on our experience. And I'm going to lay out the case for you. And that's what he did in here. He laid this out as a stock analyst would lay out a case of why one would want to come to believe, which is why we try and show you precisely, because it's so masterfully laid out. Does that make sense? So he said, I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. How many of you got to that point at some point? Ricky did. Patrick did. Kent did. Good deal. What happened then? Changed your mind. I may have overreacted. Yeah. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. So he's doubling down on how committed he is. How many of you doubled down on how committed you were? How many of you were wrong? Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. And he asked himself, and this is, I think it's an interesting question for all of us, where had been my high resolve? Because it wasn't a matter that I didn't mean it, right? So I simply didn't know. How many of you got to the point where you really didn't know why you did what you did? It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Was I crazy? Did you ever get to the point you wondered about your sanity?
Yes.
I began to wonder for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. So Bill is describing to you in his mind what alcoholic insanity is. It's an appalling lack of perspective. That, in spite of whatever I'm being delivered from, somehow I need to be delivered chemically from this minute that I'm in. Yeah. And just cashing in the whole life for it. So renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. So now he's talking about a little bit of sober time, and he's starting to think that he's kind of chosen this, right? I choose not to drink today. But remember, they said if you really are this guy, somewhere in the journey, you've probably lost the power of choice. Okay, well, that's what he said. This happened to him, and he said, I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. And then one day I walked into a cafe at the telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. So what happens to us is, as time starts to go out until we start growing in the spirit, is that confidence replaced by cocksureness as we confuse the experience of grace, that gorilla off our back for a minute, with the illusion of control. It goes from he's got this to I got this, and then we're in trouble again. Does that make sense? So as the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I'd manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. See, he still thinks that's a choice. But if you've lost the power of choice, you were insane before you took the first one, given the history of what happens to you after the first one, right? That's assumption. So So he says, the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. So go with him, because that's part of the powerlessness experience, the unmanageability experience. Remorse, horror, hopelessness. Did you ever have some clean time and then find yourself ripping and running again? Now bring to consciousness the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next day when you realize what you have just let out of the bag. You can, right? They said it's unforgettable. I'm feeling you in the room. It is unforgettable, isn't it? It comes right back. Guys, we want to tap into those sensory experiences and share them. That's what it means to share our experience, strength, and hope. He's been gone since 1970 something. He's still sharing with depth and weight. He's still talking to your spirit. Yes? Surely you'll meet some of us as you trudge this road of happy destiny. The courage to do battle was not there. How many of you, once you used again, were like, this is all bad, and we ain't trying to arrest nothing? Okay, it says, my brain raced uncontrollably. Did you have some people around you that were cheering for your sobriety, and so when you did it again, you were trying to figure out how you were going to break it to them? Or if you're going to sneak it by them? Anybody? Get the lyometer going? Well, that's what it means that your brain's racing uncontrollably. Because I probably have a whole day planned, right? And now that's a sucker shot. We have a new agenda. Okay, so there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. So listen to what he's describing. He was sober for a while, then he gave in, and now he's drinking all night. First run out the gate. It's like, ooh, that was not part of the plan. Lois is going to be disappointed, right? And he's so afraid to even go home because he can't even walk well. Any of you ever? Yeah, sometimes we thought we walked well, but we didn't. We thought we could drive better, which was also a bad. Okay, so an all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. The morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. So he's comparing what's going on in his life to what's going on in the world around him. Interesting, isn't it? You ever notice how the world around us seems to collapse at a very similar rate to how we collapse? The market would recover, but I wouldn't. And then he said that was a hard thought. So go with him on a hard thought. He realizes that this is a temporary thing for the market, but his condition's permanent. Did you guys ever in your active addiction realize, just look, if I don't try again, I can't fail again. This is just what it is for me. And settle in to wait to die? Not everyone took it there, but many. So he says, should I kill myself? Any of you had that thought? He said, no, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Jen would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. Anybody recall that? Let me just medicate these bad thoughts away. So it says, the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. So how many of you had to start taking from the family's money and go do what you were doing because it just wasn't any other source and you couldn't get any more hookups? And yeah, that's what they're talking about. We start stealing from the people that trust still allow us around them. There were flights from the city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through my window sash and all. Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. Do you guys ever drink to delirium tremens? I got any delirium tremens drink? The delusion can get so powerful. He feared his own thoughts sporadically, right? I one time thought I had strings coming out of my mouth, and so I tried to cut them out with a commando knife, and what I was doing was gouging my teeth out. I didn't know, right? So that's what they're talking about. We can do a lot of self-harm without even knowing that's what we're doing. A doctor, these teeth, they're not mine. I bought them. Okay, so next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. So did you go to the hospital and find out they had a solution for your problem? That you really didn't have an alcohol problem, you had a Ativan Valium deficiency? So this combination soon landed me on the rocks. Did any of you find that if you mixed your prescriptions with your normal drinking habits, you could get some leg? So people feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking. I was 40 pounds underweight. Now, not all of us go 40 pounds underweight. Some of us go the other way. But we generally are looking in poor health, yes? So my brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my brother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill bodily and mentally. So Bill's component, he was kind of a famous atheist agnostic thinker, but he really couldn't get into that this power within him could restore him, mainly because he didn't think he needed a healing. He thought he had a moral failing. And so the doctor told him, no, you've been ill in body too, dude. I mean, you're kind of a jerk, but you got something else going on. And I'm just talking to you in everyday language, Anyway, it relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor. So that medical component was critical for Bill. It's not critical for everybody, but Bill needed to know he needed a healing in order for him to seek a healer. That was how he was able to confront his prejudice. Other people already have the spiritual component down, but they're feeling condemned because of their behavior. So we got to be able to present the whole thing to people so they have an opportunity to see whether or not they want it, need it. Make sense? Because it won't work for you if you don't want it and are willing to make the effort anyway. So though it often remains strong in other respects, my incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. So Bill needed a logical explanation for his illogical behavior. Anyone else relate to Bill? That's why treatment will sometimes help us for a time, because we want a logical explanation. Yes? Tell me how my body's reacting. Tell me what chemical this is that. And so understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. So what's he mean by that? He had a logical explanation for why he'd been that way, and now he knew the issue was he just couldn't even have one. Yeah? Any of you ever had that understanding? Not even a little bump of cocaine at Thanksgiving, nothing. Okay. So for 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. Now, we don't use that phraseology much anymore, but he's just talking about things we're looking up. Yeah? So I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not. So how many of you had some self-knowledge and then returned? So this is why we're trying to follow Bill, because many of us had the same experience, yes? So the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. So how many of you have had that experience of you were pretty bad and then you stopped for a minute, and then when you returned, it got bad quick? Because when it goes off like a ski jump, like your feet are touching the ground and all of a sudden you're 20 feet above the ground. So after a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker of the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. Do you relate to him there? Yeah, don't tell me that I'm dying. Tell me when I'm dying. I need some information I can use. And I'm not saying that in jest. That's really where I was. It was a devastating blow to my pride. He's still worried about his image. Any of you relate to that? Just a running mess. Just eating out of dumpsters and doing whatever crazy and feces all over yourself and vomit on your shoes. What will they think of me? I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. So he'd like to make it right to the people that cared about him, but he doesn't really believe he has it in him. Did any of you get to the point? They say that we're, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. We're left without fight. That's what an experience of powerlessness is. So no words can tell the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. So he says no words can describe it. Can you take yourself there? It's really very difficult to put a description to how it feels to really know you're done and not really care. It says, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. I think that's a really neat picture. What happens if you struggle in quicksand? You sink faster. In modern fellowships, we often tell you got this. Just keep fighting. Cease fighting. You can't win. You're going down faster when you fight. See why it's so important that we tell their story and not whatever silliness we make up. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. How many of you have been sobered by fear? Fear of consequence, fear of... Then he says, then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. Now he gets really clear. He didn't say anything crazy after that was his insanity. The insanity was the first drink, knowing what was going to happen to him after that, right? On Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was to be the beginning of my last debauch. So how many of you would have never guessed on your last run that it was your last run? Isn't that weird? I'd have probably done more if I'd have known it was my last one. I mean, I think about how I think. I was so beat, but woman, get up. You can do this one more time. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. So he's talking about something not of his own power, right? When you're catapulted, you don't catapult yourself. And he's talking about a fourth dimension of existence, which he's never really expounded on in meaningful ways. But if you look at what the known dimensions were at that time, they've since added the dimension of time and space, right? Which is that fourth dimension, right? Otherwise, there was three that they spoke of. So if you're beyond time, where are you? You're now. And if you're beyond space, where are you? So you're here and now. So he's talking about a catapulted into the here and now from whatever death he was living. Does that make sense? So, and then he tells you what it feels like to be in that fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness. How many of you had heard of happiness? Probably cut up a little and giggled a little, but to really know, to be anchored in happiness, to know happiness. Like happiness is my state and not dictated by circumstance. Pretty profound, isn't it? I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. So he learned that recovery was every bit as progressive as his illness had been. Interesting, isn't it? So he says, near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen with a certain satisfaction I reflected that there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. So I don't know how many of you were drinkers, but drinkers are hiders. And we have to have cash where no one's going to get it from us. Yeah. So it says, my musing was interrupted by the telephone, the cheery voice of an old school friend. Come over. He was sober. Now, Bill put he was sober in italics because it was such a completely unbelievable, miraculous event. When you were out there running and gunning, did you always try and maintain at least one person that you were not quite as bad as? A lot of us, when we're really, at least I'm not that bad. You can see me doing that, right? So that's who this cat is for him. I'm not that bad yet. That's who this cat, and he's on the phone and he's sober. He's in New York. He said, it was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. You got to get, because this is Bill, the famous atheist / agnostic, about to experience his first tangible miracle that he's conscious of. And you got to understand how ridiculous it sounds that Ebby's in New York to see him and he's sober. So then he said that rumor had it that he'd been committed for alcohol insanity. I wondered how he'd escaped. Of course, he would have dinner and then I would drink openly with him, unmindful of his welfare. I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was a time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. So let's look at that metaphor. What is an oasis? It could be both, right? It could be a complete illusion in an arid place and you'd lay down and drink sand. Or it could be a source of life in an arid place. So he thinks his buddy coming that he can drink openly with is an oasis. Interesting, somewhat prophetic, right? So the door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. Now, without being weird or, disparaging of people's sexuality, it appears to me that's a weird way for one man to talk about his drinking buddy. Yes?
Yes.
Sean came to visit me and he was fresh-skinned and glowing. You guys would be suiting me up for something, right? Okay, so he says there was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. There was something that he was witnessing that was just, he couldn't even describe what was going on. And he asked himself what had happened. He says, I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Because you had to check him, right? The guy's escaped from the mental asylum, and he says he doesn't drink. He says he's sober. Let's see. That's what it meant to him to be unmindful of his welfare. Let's just see how committed he is. And he said, disappointed, but he refused it. Disappointed, but curious. I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. So he asked because he was curious. What is up? Something is up. He said, he looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion. Now, I don't care what your religious leanings are. You're sitting there drunk and drinking, and you're thinking you are going to twist off. And then you ask this cat why he isn't drinking and why he's there visiting you, and he says, I've got religion. The fun meter goes, like, this is going to suck, right? Mate, are you, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So he said that. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. So he's like, okay, more for me. Go ahead and give me your story, right? So are you with him? His mindset now? Okay. But now Ebby doesn't behave the way religious people are supposed to behave. Because he did no ranting. Oh, fuck. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. So we run from that in modern fellowship today. I encourage you not to. We have a religious idea and a practical program of action. That's all we've ever had. The religious idea is the power we call God dwells in you. That power dwells in you. And we have a practical program of action that will prove that fact to you, through you, if you will walk it out. Not asking you to believe in concepts. We're asking you to come to believe based on a new experience that you desperately need. Yes? Yes. So he had come to pass his experience along to me if I cared to have it. So the minute he walked to the door fresh-skinned and glowing, he passed that experience on to him. And then it took a while for the mind to catch up what had happened. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed, my grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings, his insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen, his fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past, and they made me swallow hard. So Bill's describing his reminiscence to his grandfather, even at his deathbed, talking about his firm belief in God and not allowing the preachers, just out of fear, to tell him how he must worship. And that struck, it resonated with Bill. This guy really believes what he's saying. He's not selling anything. Does it make sense? That the whole idea, the reason 12-step works sometimes where the church falls short is our evangelism is based on personal testimony. Yes? They know where we come from because we know where we know where we found them, right? We're specially equipped to go to those places and come back out. So he said they made me swallow hard. So what happens is when he brought that to consciousness, the spirit in him moved. Does it make sense? Have you ever been just talking to people and all of a sudden, like you're overwhelmed, something moved in you and you're choking back? That's what he's describing to you. Notice how it's always a sensory experience he's describing. So he said that wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. I'd always believed in a power greater than myself. I'd often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists and the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? So he asked himself that question. If you've ever asked yourself anything similar, does there seem to be an order to things even if you can't fully comprehend the order? That's all it takes to get started. An acknowledgement that something's in play bigger than me. Make sense? So I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I got. With the ministers and world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. So that still happens to people. That's why when we say God, you say power. We're trying to call your attention to the experience, because we can all get down. We've done all kinds of illogical things in pursuit of an experience. Yes? Because you don't get here on a winning streak. Yes? Okay. So I'm going to jump from there to the middle of that page 11. But my friend sat before me and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. So Bill had admitted complete defeat, but he had not considered there was a restoration. Does that make sense? So the only difference, when the step says we admitted, we progressively, we admit that we're powerless, and we're powerless to manage our own lives. And then we start walking into the power to do the management. Yes? Right? Okay. So then he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he'd ever known. So what is it to be recovered? Taken from the scrap heap and raised to a level of life better than the best you ever known. It's not a medical recovery. It's a mining term, not a medical term. To take from what was thought waste and extract something infinitely powerful. That's why when there's always these arguments, we never recover. They say it 17 times in here. So you need to find a definition of the word that works, right? All right, so had this power originated in him? Bill concluded, obviously, it did not. There is no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all. So he knew there was power in him that was not of him. That he knew. Yeah? He said, that floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in the human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. There sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I'm going to stop here because this is the whole point. The author said to show others precisely how we recovered, and we think it's maybe an act, but it's not. It's that simple demonstration of not doing anything. You know, it's the old dragnet thing, just the facts, ma'am, nothing but the facts, right? This is what I was. You know what I was. This is what I am, and I'm here to pass this on to you if you'll have it. It's a religious idea and a practical program of action. Right? And we don't have to hide. I'm spiritual, not religious. Nobody knows what the fuck that means. You're trying to sell me Vaseline. Dish it out straight. I'm talking about that power the religious people call God. He lives in you. He wants your attention. He sent me to you. You don't have to believe that, but believe me, you ain't that attractive. But here I am. Right? So that's what we got. That's what we offer you this week. We'll see you next week. Thanks.